Hello.
Hello.
Very good morning to all. On behalf of Women's Study Center, Tripura University, I take this opportunity to welcome this August gathering. Today is the fourth day of our lecture series program. We are privileged to have with us Professor Chandrika Bose Mujumdar, former Dean, Arts and Commerce, and also the former Director of this center. We have our esteemed speaker, Professor Swati Ghosh from Rabindra Bharati University, Dr. Parthasarathi Gupta from Department of English, Tripura University is also here with us, and other faculty members of the Tripura University, students, research scholars. We welcome you all. Now, I request Professor Paramita Saha, Director, Women's Study Center, to initiate today's proceeding. Paramita.
Thank you, Ashif. A very good morning to you all, distinguished ladies and gentlemen from the faculty, my students, and from the outside of our university. I extend a hearty welcome to all of you. This is the fourth day of our lecture series, and the last for this month. We will again resume in March after the semester examinations are over in our university. Now, in this series of lectures, our focus has been the marginal population and the challenges they face in the present pandemic context. There are numerous factors that leads to marginalization, like poverty, caste, community, genders, and many more. One such marginalized group are the women who are engaged in sex work. This dark underbelly of a society usually stays out of our discourses and treat us as outsiders. We used to have sneak peeks of their miseries, their lives in films and novels. As I understand, it was during the HIV prevention drive that the global community felt compelled to look into the deplorable living conditions and health issues as a part of the safe sex campaign. To enlighten us about all these and many more, we are delighted to have Professor Swati Ghosh as today's distinguished speaker. Swati hardly needs an introduction here. She has been a close associate of this center for long. She is the professor of economics in Rabindra Bharati University and also the director of Women's Studies Center there. With many national and international publications to her credit, her academic credentials are enviable. Her last publication from Oxford, The Gendered Proletariat, is widely acclaimed. We are eager to listen to you, Swati. And without taking much of your time, I would request today's chairperson, Professor Chandrika Bose Mujumdar, to kindly take over. And I'm also to mention here that we have Dr. Parthasarathi Gupta from English department with us, who will be moderating the introduction sessions and who the discussion for after the lecture. So over to Professor Chandrika Bose Mujumdar, who was the former director of this center and was former Dean of Arts and Commerce in this university, and today is in charge of the VC's office. So over to you, Chandrika.
Good afternoon to you all, members of this August gathering, and particularly Professor Swati Ghosh. She is actually very known to our center, Women's Studies Center. She has been the member of Advisory Council. Always we get cooperation from her. So today we welcome you. Our actually this center, Women's Studies Center, they are doing a very good job arranging this lecture series, and the focus, the thrust area is also very good. That is to analyze the women in marginalized section. Already we have discussion about refugee women, about the status of women in Northeast India as a whole. Again, women from traditional Sanskrit literature perspective. And today this area, this area is very sensitive in the sense that very little work has been done there. Professor Swati has rightly coined this term, gendered proletariat, to the sex workers. About 8 lakhs workers are there, sex workers, they have taken this as a profession. But their condition, as our director pointed out, very deplorable condition. And really to come out from that, government also has taken initiative, but in pandemic time, they have suffered a lot. Not all the state government has taken any initiative or positive step to remove their poverty or to help them. So in this context, these sex workers, and always we see this, although it is a legal profession, India has legalized this profession, still their scope and their opportunities are very, very, what I will say, few. They, they are not getting proper help from the administrative structure also. Professor Swati has done a very good work and about them. Today, I hope will be enriched from her lecture. So welcome, Professor Ghosh. You please start your lecture.
Thank you. Thank you, Chandrika Di. And I also thank the Women's Studies Center, Tripura University, especially the director, Dr. Paramita Shaha, for organizing this lecture and inviting me. It's a pleasure to be on the same platform with Professor Chandrika Basu Majumdar and also Professor Partho Sarathy Gupta. Good afternoon to everybody. I also thank all who are present here online, all the teachers, research scholars, and students for having spared their precious time to attend this program. Thank you all. My topic today is sex workers movement and the question of agency. You will notice that there are two portions in the title. The first part is sex workers movement and the second part is the agency question. Here, I mean agency as empowerment, agency obtained through work, or to be specific, agency obtained through embodied sex work. I come here to the agency part later. First, I would start with the specific nature of sex work and the movement that came up in recent times. Before I begin, I would like to say that I speak from political economic line of thinking. For analyzing sex work, the nature of work, and the worker status, that is to be understood first to talk about the movement of the workers. From this point of view, I would say sex workers movement is a very specific and unique because it is not like the movement of any other organized labor, nor is it movement of some groups of unorganized informal sector workers. Then, how is sex workers movement different? One might question. To understand that, what is so unique about their movement, we have to examine the nature of work they do, which is not wage labor or salaried labor or profit making from the trade. It is embodied labor. I categorize it as embodied labor and I will try to explain it a little bit. Now, I consider sex work as embodied labor where body is involved in the activity along with labor. The nature of the work is such that body of the worker becomes not only important for work, but body becomes the sole means of work, the instrument of work in its varied functions, and also the site of work, that is the place of the activity. where it takes place. So embodied work is work through the body, work on the body, work of the body. And all these different aspects combine into the embodied work of a sex worker. Now, how does a sex worker differ from other laborers who also work with their body? Say, say a service sector worker, or the laborer in factory production, or say the agricultural worker in the fields, etc., where there is also lot of sweat, lot of hard labor put in, lot of physical action. Why would these laborers, for whom there is lot of bodily action uh, which is involved in their work, lot of labor involved, not be considered to be embodied labor? My answer to that is yes, there are similarities, but the difference is bigger. And it is this difference that marks the sex worker as embodied work, as there are, because they are not purely wage work. It is not wage work at all. And as for the similarities, similarities also are many. Like other workers, there is a market for sex work. They also receive some kind of payment, a reward for the work that they do. And a sex worker, it is well known that she often quotes her own price for the service she delivers. That is, there is a demand for a service and she herself supplies the sexual service. She herself does it. She offers her own self. But the difference lies in the nature of activity that she performs, which is through her body and sexuality. And that is what marks her as an unique worker. And this also lends an, I would say, an incommensurability to her to be compared with other workers. Let me elaborate a little. For a sex worker, A, body and sexuality is directly involved in her work, which is non-existent in other kinds of work. B, sex work is a personal service provided privately to an individual and not available in the market as a standardized commodity. But it is obtained at a general price, and most importantly, sex work is not value producing. Now these three, A, B and C, are the three minimum criteria that differentiate sex work from any other kind of work or labor. Work in the economic sense means an activity. Any activity that is performed for money has to obey the rules of the market. Only then the activity may be termed as work. This is according to the logic of economics. The market always need not be a physical market with real existence. It is market in abstraction. It may be a market in abstraction, or even as today, it can be an online market too, virtual market. But if a product or service is produced for self or as a gift for someone, then it is not exchanged for money. The rules of the market then do not apply. Plain and simple, it is not work. But in the economic sense, work is done, work is performed when money and product or money and service change hands. Value for value. Value of money against value of product or the service. So value creation is a conditionality for market exchange. Value has to be created and it should be measurable. Only then it can be equated with money. And there should be nothing personal about it. When we consider sex work, we know that for sex work there is a market, a physical market most of the time, and the male clients, they get to choose from the available supply the kind of female body he needs for sexual gratification and is ready to pay money for it. So apparently it seems to be work, but not in the strict economic sense. I repeat, why do I say so? I repeat, because there is no production of value in sex work. There is no production of value in the sense there is no increase in efficiency. There is no savings of time from the activity that is done, whoever does it. It is merely spending of labor for a payment. And most of the time it is servile labor. That is, the labor who receives a payment for fulfilling the desire of another. It is not reciprocal too most of the time. So this kind of activity is disqualified as work, where mere spending of labor and money in no way qualifies it as work. Economic rationality tells us that something of value has to be performed, has to be produced, and it should be measurable, not merely labor, and not merely for personal wish fulfillment. Only because one has a fat wallet, fat purse, lot of money, does not consider that he can dictate a work to be performed. The payments that are made to a sex worker can be exorbitantly high, but again, that does not bring it under market rules. It comes from personal wish fulfillment. Like we very often we offer tips, we offer bukshish, something like that. And their market rules are violated. Rules of the market are in a way universal and set according to rational economic logic. Here, for the sex worker, a high payment means the client is benevolent, nothing more, nothing less. Uh, now, the question of livelihood or income earning from sex work can also be brought up in this context. It may not be work, but it becomes a livelihood for someone. Yes, that is true. The money earned from sex work provides a living for the sex worker, and therefore one may want to call it work. But since this work does not produce value, she has to enter into a very personal kind of intimate kind of relationship with the buyer in the activity to earn money. Economic rationality would deny to call it work. Had it been in work in the economic sense and the worker a labor in general, it would have been possible to reduce sex work to a standardized act. Say a sex doll, for example, a commodity which anyone could perform on anyone else for a fixed price and without having to satisfy personal dimensions of demand for the client. But when human beings perform this act, the typicality of the service is in its intangibility. The service is corporeal, physical, and is also to be perceived corporeally. And here lies the problem of measuring it. The activity is not detachable from body or from bodies, I should say. The service is rendered when the client asks for the service, and it has to be consumed then and there. There is an immediacy to the consumption of the service. It is not, you cannot separate it. There is no ready stock of production behind this exchange. Rather, there is always an immediacy of production and consumption together taking place. And the service is notionally different every time it is performed, even for the same client, even by the same service provider. The same act may not be exactly the same as it is performed today and as it is performed tomorrow. So with every performance comes a different, there comes a qualitative change because it is performed by human beings. And there can be no standardized version of it. These are all, I'm speaking strictly in the political economic sense. In other kinds of personalized services, there may be many reasons other than desire, sexual desire, and sexual desire for the reason of its performance. And in those kinds of services, say that of the bodily service offered by say beauty parlor worker, or a salon artist, or a physiotherapist for that sake. But these service providers, they do bodily work, but they are in a position of dominance to decide upon the nature of the service, but not in sex work. Say the physiotherapist who provides bodily service, the beauty parlor worker who provides bodily service to the client. Those are also embodied services. Money is paid for that, but the service rendered to the customer is personal. So similarities are many, but the nature of care that is provided is predetermined. And the service provider, in these cases, they have the autonomy to decide about the nature of the service. They are the ones who works with some scientific or medical knowledge that this is the standard of service, this is the unit of service, this is the nature of the service that is to be offered to each of the clients. Okay, without going into further details of the analysis, I would like to talk about the nature of the movement of this very special kind of embodied labor, that is sex work. But the differences are quite a few, as I said, and I would like to say one is this type of work in the economic sense is not value producing. It is performed in the very intimate and personal domain where body and sexuality is involved, and therefore that makes measurability very difficult, or rather impossible. You cannot reduce it to any kind of abstract labor. Exchange value is not produced. And this kind of work earns money, but strictly speaking, one would say it is a different, that is why I call it a different category of labor, which is embodied labor. Even within embodied labor category, the difference is in all the cases, body and sexuality is not involved. And for a physiotherapist or a parlor artist, we would know, for a salon worker, for other kind of personal services, the relation of power is differently set. It is the service provider who dictates the service and offers it in certain unit, the client is the receiver. In case of sex worker, the client is the receiver, yes, but client decides, client dictates the nature of the service. And here no value is produced. The physiotherapist or the parlor worker, they produce value. They change certain things. Some transformations take place for good. Here there is no transformation. It is only satisfaction of desire. So this is a relationship of power and desire. And that is why economics would rather deny to designate it as work in the economic sense. Okay. Now I would talk about the movement of the sex workers and to understand why this movement, as I said in the beginning, is different from that of the movement of the other kinds of laborer, is because the work itself is different. The nature of the work is something else. It is embodied labor and which is intangible from the sight of work. It is not measurable. And claiming rights based on this particular nature of work then becomes very difficult to understand. But what we find today is, maybe not today, few decades back, from then on the movement had started, we find that she is no longer a woman in prostitution of the old times when it was a way of life, way of living for many women who may have entered the profession by force or maybe even by choice, but willingly was dependent on the client. But the difference today is the question of movement comes up because today she is claiming herself to be a worker and building up a movement with other sex workers in solidarity. In fact, it is she herself who has given her the name of sex worker. Historically, her position had always been significant in the Indian society until, of course, in the colonial period, where she became a very typical subject. In ancient times, prior to the colonial period, she was a tax-paying woman of high status. Chanakya's Arthashastra says so, and she belonged to a differentiated social status according to her accomplishments. We know Shukumari Bhattacharya, the feminist scholar, Sanskrit scholar, and she has told us that initially she was called according to her accomplishments, she was categorized as the Rupojibi, Noti, Barangana, Kumbhodashi, Shadharani, etc. in Sanskrit. The prostitute woman was also deployed for diplomatic jobs as spy at that time and was highly refined performers of several art forms. And then also we find there were the Devdasis, a community of singers and dancers in South India, the temple prostitutes serving kings and the priestly castes, priests. Even during the Muslim period, the Tawaifs and the Kotewalis, who were highly accomplished of the Muslim Ashrafi culture, such that the princes and the sons of the aristocrats were sent to them to acquire the refinements of art and culture, music and performance. As you know, I'm referring to Veena Oldenburg's work with reference to Lucknow's Tawaifs. But in the colonial period, I said, things, however, changed totally. From the 19th century, mid-19th century, I would say, little after a decade after the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857, when the British rule was well established, they were not allowed to live anywhere in the city. And I'm talking of the Bengal presidency then. And taking at referring to that period, I'm considering Sonagachi as which was the biggest prostitute area of the time of the Kolkata city space. It was Calcutta then, yes. The prostitutes were forced to segregate in a geographically marked area called the red light zone, Nishiddho Polli. Now this red light zone was reserved for them, and this was done during the colonial period. Previously, they could stay anywhere in the city, scattered within the residential areas, or maybe in a particular quarter, but they could come and go. And they were a part of the society. It maybe you can evil part of the society, you can say, but that was integrated to the whole. But legal difference was established during the colonial period. And she and the sex work, she was prostitute then, known as the prostitute, or the other names. Okay, and uh, she was she was a female. She was she served not the colonial people, but the colonizers, and that is why this kind of segregation was necessary. It was the British soldiers who had to, and the sailors who had to leave their country, the common Britishers I'm talking of, the rank and file, who had to leave their country and come to the foreign land to fight for their lives. They were the clients of these prostitutes. They had to stay without their family in India, and they were young, and their salary was low, so they took to local women and visited the prostitutes. And soon it was found that sexually transmitted disease like syphilis became very much, the British soldiers became very much infected by these disease. And the Indian prostitutes were accused of spreading syphilis to the British soldiers and sailors. That is why the law was passed. In a very few years, after it was passed in Britain. In 1864, the Law of Contagious Disease Act was passed in Britain, and within 4 years, in 1868, it was passed in India. So this was to segregate the diseased population, yet the population which was very much required for the soldiers to keep them functioning and keep them away from being unrestful. And they were the ones to be treated. They were treated medically because they were diseased. They were the ones who created law and order problems. So criminalization of the prostitute started during this period. That is why red light areas and in contrast, it's ironical that the Indians called syphilis Firingi Rog, the disease that came from the Firingis. Today's historical analysis will say that the then colonized people, the rich aristocracy, they in this scenario supported the British. They too wanted their residential quarters be free of all these infections, naturally, and free of the prostitutes. But they were also the clients of these prostitutes. Naturally, they needed the women be free of disease. if we refer to the history, it's very interesting. So maybe I can tell you a little bit on that. They were not only physically segregated, they were also physically examined and enclosed. They were kept in the area which were called lal bazaars. Look at the word lal, red. So something dangerous, something criminal. Shumanto Banerjee, we can refer to his work on Kolkata's Shonagachi. And if we go by the first British census of 1871-72, we will see that from that time itself, they have started categorizing the prostitutes as a separate category of separate section of the population. It was not for their welfare, but it was to keep a record and initiate a surveillance on them, that how many of them have undergone registration. Okay. And the laws, the prostitutes, they fled from the city, and then they were, the police went and captured them and jailed them, and this went on continuously. But the medical treatment made a direct intervention into their body for the first time through Western medical process. So they were considered to be subjects of the colonizers, but a lesser subject, marginalized. That is what I want to mean. The colonial period was the initiation of this marginalization of the lesser subjects as diseased bodies, as dangerous bodies, as criminal bodies. With respect to even Bombay presidency, similar kind of thing, you will notice, and Ashwini Tambe has worked on it, where she shows that European prostitutes were separated and spared from police action. But the local Indians, they were under strict police control. But prostitution was never not abolished by law. Later in 1950s, it continued. It continued throughout the colonial period, and similar things. And police, because they were criminals and dangerous, police could raid anytime they wanted. And it continued in the post-independent period as well. And by the time many red light centers developed, not only in Calcutta, but in districts and everywhere. Previously, also there were the prostitutes. They were necessary for the sexual fulfillment of the male clienteles, powerful male clienteles everywhere. But this kind of segregated red light areas were created for the first time during the colonial period. And registration, it was a particular occupation marked in the census, and therefore registration of their occupation was a legal necessity. Now I would come to the post-colonial period, which is a little bit different. The post-independent period was the same, but in post-colony we find certain things of the colonial period being repeated. What is that? Today she is we do not say she is a prostitute, she is a worker in sex, she is a sex worker. In Bangla we say Jauno Kurmi. She herself gave her the name. And Jauno Kormo is the work. Jauno Kurmi. So Kormo, the work itself is important here. And based on this worker status, her movement comes up. So this sex work, when she was transformed into a sex worker, that marks the beginning of a movement. And that led to becoming a sex worker, led to a political struggle where a worker has her own rights. Now, when did this emerge? What was the point of initiation? It is interesting to note that not only when the colonial rule ended, but much later, when in 1986, there was an amendment to the Colonial Act. And this amendment by the independent government of India kept the same rule, but made some amendment regarding functioning of the prostitute, which was very repressive. She could not, come 200 meters away from the red light areas, etc. Something like this. And clause by clause, these were set, which was not in the previous law. So until then, there was no change in status. But from 1986, this Immoral Traffic Prevention Act became established. It was established. And the sex workers started rejecting it, protesting it. They did not call it Immoral Traffic Prevention Act. They simply called it Pita Ain. And their slogan was Pita Ain Batil Karo, reject it. They wanted to repeal the Amendments Act. But there was a little difference here. The central government was interested. The central government also kept a surveillance on the sex workers, and like the colonial period, they too maintained the segregation of the sex workers within the red light areas in very strict terms. And the whole thing was done medically in the name of treating the medical treatment of the sex workers were required to make them disease free. But only the difference was, this time it was not syphilis, but it was HIV/AIDS, which we all know is a lifestyle disease and which is not of Indian origin. But the same plea was used to say that the sex workers are the ones who spread them, just as the Britishers did in context of syphilis. And the male clients had to be protected. Therefore, the spreading body, the disease-affected body of the sex worker had to be made disease-free. So the government initiated certain kind of programs there in the name of health programs for special requirement of the sex workers, which was basically distribution of condoms for free, and treatment of the workers, treatment where again the body of the worker was the site of intervention, and through injections, through other kinds of examinations of the physical private parts, etc. These surveillance went on. And the health programs never mentioned that this was a program for surveillance or taking care of the sex workers, but it is a general health program to prevent HIV/AIDS. And very cleverly, this post-colonial intervention, I would say, used the sex workers themselves to to take part in the health schemes. Senior and ex-prostitutes were employed as the ones who could bring all the young sex workers to the health clinics. They were the ones who would distribute and be the flag hoisters of adopting the contraceptive measures for the clients and the sex workers. Clients never used contraceptives, but it was the sex workers, it was their onus was on them to use it, because they are the disease carriers. As always, women uses it. Women has to use it, because the pleasure of men, that cannot be thwarted. Yeah. At this point, the sex workers themselves, the ones who were into the health project and who were not, they together considered that this is something going on with their body, intervention going on with their body, using themselves, which they did not like. And this was going on in the name of legal action, medical treatment, medical intervention by the state. So from that point, a movement started. And now their slogan was that it was that I work with my body and I want workers' rights. In Bengali, it was Gotor khatiye khai, Shromiker odhikar chai. So Gotor means the body and Shromik we know. So she wanted to identify herself as any other worker. This movement, she was not, but she wanted herself to be acknowledged as a worker. And there comes she being a Jauno Kormi. And this Jauno Kormi status, sex worker status, became the epitome of her struggle. All the names that she was known by, Besha, Barbonita, Noti, Barangona, etc., Lainer Me, Nishiddha Pollir Me, Potita, those were all rejected. She chose this name for herself. Even in English, prostitutes, whore, slut, no. Public woman, fallen woman, no. She became a sex worker because only a worker is liable to have rights. Only a worker is paid according to market rules. Only a worker can be a citizen. All our ethics of work can be applied only to a worker. Okay. I will refer to, though I think running short of time, yet then I will refer to an interesting episode. We all know a Bengali writer, novelist, the first novelist I would say, was also an administrator of colonial days. I'm referring to Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay in his Kamalakanter Doctor, where when Kamalakanto Chakraborty, when he was questioned in court about drinking the milk of Prasanna Gowalini, and asked by the lawyer that as it is usually done in court, what is your profession? When Kamalakanto was asked, Kamalakanto had replied, am I a lawyer like you, or am I a prostitute that I will have a profession? Here comes the occupational status being mentioned, the prostitute being for the first time becomes a worker mentioned there. It's a profession, it becomes a profession there. It's a reference of the colonial period, though I wanted to mention it. And Kamalakanto's point was that I am a Brahmin and my living is, I live by being invited to have lunch at someone else's house. আমি নিমন্ত্রণ গ্রহণ করে রাসাচ্ছাদন করি। আমি উকিল বা বেশ্যা নই, right? These were the words. আমি কি উকিল না বেশ্যা যে আমার পেশা থাকবে? And that's a marvelous play on the word pesha and vritti of a Brahmin and pesha of the lawyer. So, okay, I come back. Okay. Okay, so it was for even in post colony, we find the doctors, the lawyers, the police, the administrators, they are detaining her again as a dangerous body, as a criminalized body, as someone to be used but with safety measures, controlled and regulated. So here lies the transformation of the gendered subject from the objectified status to a subjecthood for the first time that her movement gives her. She becomes a citizen subject, where here we note not only the sex worker term refers simply to an income generating profession, but this is a term without any moral connotation. And it's a more culturally neutral term, indicating her livelihood, worker in sex, nothing more, without any shame of any kind. Now, this evolution reflects a kind of ideological shift from the social to the economic, from a way of life of the prostitute to a mode of work of the sex worker, from a morally laden notion or immorally laden notion to a personal individuality of a worker. The nature of the work, actual work done, act of the sex act remains, however, the same. But the movement, when she demands Gotor Khatiye Khai and Tai Shrumikeর অধিকার চাই, now it is clear that she is not to be controlled or regulated on moral or social grounds as before, because of her livelihood. Whether one supports her or not does not matter. She has made herself visible and has courage to denounce the law framed by the state. And she wants recognition for the job she does. She has made herself public as a collective of workers in the mainstream, and she comes out with a political leaflet in hand, a manifesto. For the first time, she comes to the Calcutta Book Fair. Of course, the book fair milieu did not allow her admission. I'm talking of the late 1998, I think. And she brings up a procession, a demonstration on the night of 1st May. Notice the date, 1st May. And the night, because her profession is related to night hours. And where she pronounces all those slogans for the other citizens to see and recognize her, the media to know that she is now no longer a voice of someone else would speak for her, but she herself has gained a voice. And here she reconfigures the idea of agency altogether. She becoming a voice or not is much debated, but she has made herself visible. Should we call it a feminist voice? Because I would say yes. We all have different moral positions and grounds for sympathy for her, but recognition as equal is often far off. So the debate continues. But I would say the movement has spread across beyond. It has gone beyond Kolkata to the districts, to other states, to other regions of the country, and they have invited them to a national conference, national convention, inviting all the sex workers to join, and there they have brought out the manifesto of the sex workers. Now, manifesto, this is an organized movement of resistance, and their agency, I would say, is multi-layered expression. It is not merely undertaking, leading a procession. It is not merely bringing out a manifesto or shouting slogans. The sex workers, the illiterate women, many of them, with all their gaudy makeup, they are coming out on the streets. Initially, I have witnessed it. Initially, they could not, be loud with their slogans, though their voices are loud enough always. We know them to be loud women, but then slowly they catch up with the movements, they catch up with the slogans, and with conviction they announce that they are sex workers and they want workers' rights. They have, jointly went to the police to protest against police raids in red light quarters for no reason at all. They have jointly made petitions to the councillors, to the mayors, etc. Not only in Kolkata, in many other places as well, in Maharashtra, in Kerala, in Andhra, Tamil Nadu, and in other states also. This has become a in different. Initially, in Kolkata's name was Durbar Mahila Samanway Committee, but in other states there are different names, but the worker status is very important, and this has given them an agency. Of course, I would say. It is their voice which they are in. It's no longer the voice of the doctor, no longer the voice of the lawyer or administrator, or not even of the NGOs. It is they themselves. Okay, and Chandrikati, do I have 5 more minutes? Should I continue? Because I think time is nearly up.
Continue, Shatindi.
Okay.
We are mesmerized.
Okay, a little bit I have to say. Now, in gendered proletariat, I call them gendered proletariat. See, I started by saying that it is not economically. If you ask me, I will say it's not work in that sense. But I have always been with them. I have been because whenever not as an activist always, I've written for them. They have a newsletter kind of thing of their own. So anyone is free to write. They have set up a cooperative of their own. These, I think, are very important aspects. They are thinking about their future in their own way. And of course, the newsletter is for circulation, for letting other people know. I do not, even I would question their worker status theoretically. But as an activist, I am with them. Now, from that position, I would say that here the question of agency is very complicated again. Yes, visibility and voice has been well established for the last 20 years. We all now no longer we call them by any other name than sex worker. So theoretically, I would like to establish 2 instances of agency, which I think cannot be debated. No one will debate, and no one will want to differ from this position. Now, I come to this because I think this is where they deserve. It is my opinion that this is where they deserve to be worker. They deserve to be even taken a proper resistance, not like the organized labor, but we cannot but accept their role and whatever they have to say. So there comes the question of agency. Now, what does agency convey? What do we mean by agency? It is ability to act. It is ability to speak in one's own voice. Yes, to protest.
Within 5 minutes, you please brief it.
Sure.
We were really, your lecture is really appealing.
I definitely would. Definitely. I want just 5 minutes. Yeah. So to earn freedom and autonomy, to take decision about self, these are the points of agency, right? And of course, working within the constraints and restrictions. So agency for sex workers may be understood as achieving some extent of empowerment to have the capacity to act and negotiate the conditions of work towards transformation of the situation. But we have to realize that they are the products of patriarchy. And in spite of all this agency, they are subject to patriarchal rules because their work is a equation of power between man and woman, where she is dominated and exploited, right? Okay. So she may want our right, but she cannot say that she is not being dominated. Now, the two agentic points or the two agencies that I consider are very, very important is taking up the question of Sonagachi, which I studied in much details, and others also follow, but I will stick to that. Today, Sonagachi is a name internationally. It has become a model of sex workers' resistance. Now, what I want to focus on is the possibility of agency, which is collective in one, which is drawing up writing the manifesto, and the second is an individual agency of decision making as mothers. Now, the authorship of Manifesto of the Sex Workers is one, and the experience of motherhood for the prostitute, I say, is a second point of agency, which we must not forget. Now, why should we read the manifesto? Because manifesto is a unique document, which it was first drawn up by the Durbar Mahila Samanvay Committee, and it came up at a time when organized movement of industrial workers had nearly stopped. It was declining. Not because of that, but this manifesto comes out as a result of a organization, of a movement, which has given new meaning to the worker status. And it has reoriented the sexuality discourse in India. So that has given them a visibility and voice in the and given them a process, led them to a process of negotiation. That is a remarkable achievement. And in this manifesto, they bring out the political content of their struggle. Now, having the courage to draft a manifesto is a counter example of victimization. So manifesto reflects the force of the collective political action. And if you have ever read it or gone through it, you will be surprised to find that this starts exactly like the Communist Manifesto of Marx and Engels of 1844. This says there the spectre was the spectre of communism. It was against capitalism. Here, the spectre, the prostitution itself is a spectre. So the lines are similar, but it talks about the rights of the prostitutes, rights of the sex workers. No longer they are prostitutes, they are sex workers, and they blame patriarchy as the institution against which they should rebel. But the ideological stand is not weaved properly. That I can confess here. In spite of all my support for the program, if I am to analyze it as a theoretical feminist worker of women's studies, I would say the manifesto does not realize the complexities that shape the institution of patriarchy, and the manifesto has no way out, because the worker's claim is based on a work where she needs to be dominated. She has to be dominated. She is under the patriarchal law, norm, order. That power remains.
You have to answer lots of questions maybe there. So can you...
Just I'll mention the other instance. Other instance is very interesting. And that is, I would say, apart from the prostitute, apart from the manifesto, we might have our own criticisms for it. We might be critical about it, being internal to their politics, but again, as theoretics, as theoreticians, we can criticize it a little bit. The internal criticism that I'm talking of. But the concept of motherhood, that individual prostitutes, individual sex workers still continue, even at a later stage, they would, in the beginning of their lives, they have to undergo a number of abortions, etc. But yet then, they always try to defy the order of the madams and pimps and etc. They try to have one child of their own. If they cannot, they try to adopt. So motherhood is very important. But why do I call it agency? Why it is agency? Because by choice they are choosing to be single mothers. They know the name of the father, the property of the father, the protection of the father, of the family will never be assured for their child. Yet then they go for motherhood. Her work requires her to be non-mother. She is considered to be an ignoble mother. Her child is a bastard child. Yet then she longs for motherhood. And most of them are mothers. And they don't want their children to be in the same profession. So resisting the societal moral norms, I would say, in her own way, every individual is, of course, an point of agency, a very big agency, a very big show of courage, where she knows she will get nothing as property, nothing as name, nothing as family for her children. So there she becomes a political and a social subject. And that is why we discuss her in academic sessions, seminars. Thank you. Thank you all for your patient hearing.
So nice, Swati, so nice. So without wasting time, I would like to request our Dr. Parth Gupta, please coordinate the question answer session. Parth.
Thank you. Thank you, madam. Thank you, madam. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, yes, you are.
First of all,
I would like to congratulate Professor Swati Ghosh, uh, who has been literally a sort of a, she has opened many vistas here today for research scholars, for students, as well as for us teachers. I belong to the discipline of literature, and I have, literally taken down her lecture almost like a.
We are not listening to you.
You can't
Be
hear me?
louder, please.
Okay.
I hope I'm audible right now.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Chandrika madam. I would first of all start by congratulating Professor Swati Ghosh, first particularly for her exhaustive analysis of, the topic which she has taken up today. And her lecture today has been especially very informative for people like me who do not belong to the discipline directly, but I have been like a student. I have all through her lecture I was just noting down points almost like a student, and once again, let me just provide a sort of a summing up of her lecture today before I proceed to the question answer session. Professor Swati Ghosh, Director of Women's Studies, has provided an exhaustive historiography of the sex worker from the ancient Indian records, present in annals of history, to the most recent times when the worker has risen from her subservience to appropriating to herself, an agency of sorts. An agency of authorship of a sort of a manifesto, if at all, which is about to be written, almost which reorients the discourse of sexuality in which she was sort of embedded all through. In between, Professor Ghosh has provided a sweeping glance through colonial historiography, which was particularly interesting to me, the colonial historiography of the prostitute, when the medicalization of her sexuality laid the foundations of the ideology of segregation, particularly not just segregation but also marginalization. So the one connecting thread which I found, which binds the whole lecture together, is the notion of the embodiment of the sex worker, which very lucidly Professor Ghosh has, discoursed upon. Now, I would like to sort of open the session for discussion, for questions, which participants are requested to put across to Professor Ghosh. One by one, if you may please, I can see Varun Sood has raised his hands. Yes, Mr. Varun Sood, can you proceed with your question?
Uh, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, sir, may I speak in Hindi? May I speak in Hindi?
Yes, if Professor Ghosh is comfortable, taking questions in Hindi, or I can translate it for her. Fine.
I think I may understand. Yes.
Yes, fine.
Okay.
So yes, please.
मैम मैं आपके विचार का मैं बहुत बहुत सम्मान करता हूँ. I respect your view and your concern about sex worker, but I see very critically because मैम सभी लोग मतलब हमारे इंडिया में जो फेमिनिस्ट विचारधारा है वो बात करती है सेक्स वर्कर के बारे में, और वो कहती है कि सेक्स वर्क को लीगलाइज्ड करना चाहिए, क्योंकि जब इस जो एक पेशा है सेक्स वर्क का, इसको लीगलाइज नहीं करेंगे, इसको तो क्या लीगलाइज ना करने से जो सेक्स वर्कर होती हैं उनको बहुत सारी हिंसा का सामना करना पड़ता है, वायलेंस का सामना करना पड़ता है अपने काम के समय. कुछ लोग जो है कुछ ऐसी बदतमीजियां कर देते हैं, जैसे उनको जला देते हैं सिगरेट से, उनकी बॉडी को जला देते हैं. तो इस तरह की दिक्कतें उनको सामना करना पड़ता है और अपने वो राइट भी क्लेम नहीं कर सकती है. सेक्स वर्कर जो है वो इस कंडीशन में होती है कि वो झेलती है, पीड़ित होती है, सफर करती है, लेकिन वो अपना राइट भी क्लेम नहीं कर सकती है. तो बहुत सारे लोगों का मानना है, बहुत सारे नारीवादी लोगों का मानना है, विचारधारकों का मानना है कि भाई इस काम को लीगलाइज करना चाहिए ताकि वो अपने अधिकारों की मांग कर सकें, क्लेम कर सकें. लेकिन मैम हमें ये भी समझना चाहिए कि कोई सेक्स वर्कर जो बन रही है या बन रहा है वो किन हालतों में बन रहा है. हमें उन कंडीशंस के बारे में कोई जिक्र नहीं करता कि ऐसी कंडीशन बने ही क्यों कि कोई सेक्स वर्कर बने. इतना ये सबसे खतरनाक स्थिति होगी कि कोई मतलब किसी को अपने जीवन चलाने के लिए सेक्स वर्क का काम करना पड़ेगा. तो ऐसी खतरनाक स्थिति बनी क्यों? गवर्नमेंट ने क्या ऐसी कमी करी कि लोगों को सेक्स या महिलाओं को सेक्स वर्क के अंदर आना पड़ा, और इस कमी को कैसे ठीक किया जाए? और हम बजाय इन कमी के ऊपर सवाल उठाने से कि कोई महिला सेक्स वर्कर बनी ही क्यों, हम कहते हैं कि इस काम को लीगलाइज करो, जबकि यानी कि हम इस काम को सेक्स वर्क को लीगलाइज करके जस्टिफाई करते हैं. इस काम को हमें इसे जस्टिफाई नहीं करना है, कोई जस्टिफाई का काम नहीं है. जैसे मार्क्स ने कहा था कि जब पूंजीवाद अपने चरम पर होगा, जब कैपिटलिज्म अपने चरम पर होगा, पीक पर होगा, तो सभी सारी मानवीय क्रियाएं बाजार के अंदर बाजार का हिस्सा बन जाएंगी. पानी बाजार में बेचे जाने लगा, सैरोगेसी बच्चा पैदा करना बाजार में बेचा जाने लगा, सेक्स बाजार में बेचा जाने लगा. ये नॉर्मल नहीं है, ये सबसे खतरनाक कंडीशन है.
Can you
I can, Mrs. Sood, I think Madam has got the question. Yes, Madam, can you please respond?
Okay, yes. Varun, you have raised a very important aspect which I could not discuss because of time scarcity. Yes, but the feminists, what they say is, their position is the prostitution has to be decriminalized first. Decriminalization is more important. The question of legalization is there, it is debated, but then now because of the movement, what comes up is the opinion of the sex workers also matter. Do they want legalization or do they do not want? Right? So their point of view has to be taken into consideration now, whether you legalize or not. Okay? This is one. So there is no absolute demand for legalization. Now their inclusion has happened. Inclusion has been made to happen. Okay? But what feminists say is, first of all, before you talk about legalization, first decriminalize the profession. Number one. Secondly, as Professor of English Rajeshwari Sundararajan has said, that this is very notoriously difficult to say whether it should be legalized or not, because so many complex issues are involved here. And it is better to condemn the profession, not the worker. You support the worker, but you condemn the profession. So that theoretically is fine position, but when in reality, in function, as an existential reality, it becomes very difficult to sort out this particular position. Okay? Where you are with the sex worker, you support the sex worker, but you condemn the profession. Because of her profession, she is a sex worker. So this is a very intricate kind of spiral, a vicious cycle from which it is difficult to come out. Right? This is what I think. Did you get your answer? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. So thank you for your question, Mr. Sood. Now I can read out to you, ma'am, if
Yes.
you permit me, some questions which are there in the chat box.
Yeah.
The first question, Samita Barua. No, she hasn't asked a question. I can see that Director Women's Studies Center has asked a question. Chandrika Di has asked a question.
Yes.
What is the main reason for the state to not recognize sex workers as workers? What is the main reason for the state not to have sort of granted recognition
Yeah.
to the sex workers as workers?
The state directly does not say she's not a worker. State plays a very dubious role. State takes legal action. State makes law for them. That means this is accepting them as workers, as a part of the citizenship. I mean, part of the citizenry. That is why laws are made for them. That is why amendments to the laws come up. But then state never says that their views should be included. Or how can they be made part of the negotiation process? State does not intervene into the process where new girls are brought into the trade. Those are not organized by the state. So this is a very dubious position, I would say, not being either very clear on being stating that they are, yes, they are workers. And at the same time, because that means taking a moral position, accepting that they are workers and they should have their rights. What is their rights about? That should be made clear.
Related to this issue, Professor Swati, just
Yes.
can you please clarify why Traffic Immoral Act is what is this negative part? Why they are criticizing this or not accepting this act?
Okay.
I actually have no idea about this negative.
Yes. The Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, including its amendment, it says that a sex worker can practice the sexual act, within a covered area, within a room, and also immediately outside the room, but not in open space, and it should not be conducted 200 meters away from the brothel. So here the brothel is described, the red light zone is described again as a marginalized, specific, segregated area, something like a zoo, should I call it? Okay, if not a zoo. So that has to be maintained at any cost. That is part of the society, but a marginalized part. And this is what still exists. And the sex workers are not saying that we want better condition, we want a better working condition. We want air condition, we want light, we want this and that. No, we want a fixed wage. They say all that we can negotiate or we can arrange for ourselves. What we need is a moral recognition as workers. Because the mainstream cannot do without us. So why don't you accept us as equals? Now, can the state take up a moral position as this? This is where the state fails, or the state keeps quiet, or avoids the question that you have raised it very clearly.
Thank you, ma'am. I think, ma'am, you've already almost answered the next question, which I was about to sort of read out. Okay. I can see Ruchira Kakkar has asked this question: why the government is so confused on the issues and rights of sex workers?
Okay, I think the government is not confused. Government otherwise those kinds of surveillance mode of keeping and watch over the disease-prone section of the society, but which is a very necessary part of the society for the male clients. That has to be preserved. That has to be kept disease-free, danger-free zone. So this the state is very aware of. At the back of their mind, they have this. Yet they want the other portion, the mainstream, to be very neat and clean, sanitized. That is why no coming 200 meters from the brothel area into the mainstream. No. In fact, you will find that's a separate economy. There, all other kinds of commodities are available, everything is available. Only they cannot come outside the brothel and open a bank account in our kinds of banks where we go, non-sex workers. There they are prohibited, and they told us, the banks tell them that you have to bring a character certificate. What does that mean? Character certificate, asking a character certificate from a prostitute. Very ridiculous. No. They are allowed, their children are allowed to, officially yes, but you go to a school, mainstream school, their children are said, you have to produce father's name. And how would they get the father's name? These are the practical problems. But you give them ration cards. They are voters. They are important to the state. As voters, as
voters. Also take their votes.
You don't allow them to do any kind of Durga Puja in the mainstream space. Every year there is a court case on this ground. Not coming to the mainstream. Stay as marginalized, then there would be no problem. Stay as a segregated red light zone. Of course, like many developed countries, I will give you the example of Amsterdam, where the roads, the red light zone is lighted by red colored lights, and girls display their bodies, and there are very tough, bouncer kind of men who are the pimps who help you to negotiate, help the client to negotiate the price. We don't have that kind of a sex market here. Here everything is under the carpet. It is there, we know it. Yeah. State knows more better than us.
Thank you, ma'am. There is another question. Akshit Gupta, Mr. Akshit Gupta, he asks, what could be the way forward regarding the social security and legal regulations for the sex worker? And along with that, may I just add another tag question which I missed out earlier? Is there a scope of mobilization of the sex worker? So once again, ma'am, what could be the way forward regarding the social security and legal regulations of the sex worker? And is there a scope of mobilization of the sex worker?
Oh, yes. This is also a very good question, and very sensitive persons, very eager ones who who understand the problem and want to assist them, help them, have always come up with how can the sex workers be rehabilitated from their occupation, or how can they be helped. Now, I would say, or even legally, how can they be provided with some kind of legal assistance? Now, the sex workers of the ones who have already formed a collective and they are following this line of protest, of movement, they have rejected these kinds of rehabilitation plan. Initially, I was also thinking of course, from my very humble ability, that what can I do for them? Then their response was, what will you do? You can't be a client, so we can't ask money from you. And even if you pay us the money, that will be so little that it's better not offer us. All the rehabilitation programs of the NGOs, activists, or the government also, I would say, what they try to do is help them with making them able to give some training so that they can earn their own, they can become entrepreneurs, and say basket weaving or something. The sex workers basically laugh at those programs. They never participate in crafts making or all those basket making things. They say the money we earn a day is much, much higher than you imagine. So in a month, what will your rehabilitation basket making judi baniye ki hobe? So I did not dare to provide any financial help to them when I did my ethnography there. Yeah. Yeah.
Next question, ma'am. Aparna Bandyopadhyay.
Yes.
Aparna Bandyopadhyay. She first of all thanked you for your wonderful talk, and then she asks, do women who have been trafficked into prostitution seek the same recognition? I mean, the recognition of as worker. Do women who have been trafficked into prostitution seek the same recognition as worker?
Okay. Yes. Very important question. And this makes the whole debate very interesting also, what we discussed until now, because the ones who are trafficked, again, there lies the bigger picture coming in, because girls being trafficked from villages are mostly due to poverty. They are misled often by saying that you will be provided, we will provide you a job, we will provide you a good living, and that is how young girls unknowingly they come into this profession. Also, sometimes young housewives are, I should say, the family fails them, their husbands and other family members sell them as in the brothels. So that is this kind of getting trafficked and entering the profession is not by choice. This is forced into the profession. And there are a few who come by choice to seek quick money through this profession. Naturally, their interests will clash. The ones who have formed a solidarity, they are the ones who had been prostitutes and now are even ex-prostitutes themselves. They have gone through the trade through all their life, and they know how girls are trafficked. So the ones who have been trafficked, they are the ones to participate in these kinds of collectives. But there are some who would differ by saying this kinds of collectives does not allow us always to, once we have entered the profession, we want to earn money and we cannot go back. So go back and be rehabilitated within the family. So allow us to earn money as much as we can, as long our body permits. So not that it is a homogeneous stand, there are various positions within the struggle also, but on the whole, that their own opinions are coming up, that so many voices are there within the movement, is a success of the movement, I would say. Parthu, we cannot hear you. Parthu, unmute. Yes. Yes.
Sorry, ma'am.
Yes.
There's another question for you, ma'am, from Ruchika Kakkar. I think she had asked a question earlier.
Right. Yes.
Oh no, she's saying that, well, we welcome more such webinars on this.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Kakkar.
I think Patho, you can just we
Yeah,
can
ma'am.
close that.
Yes,
And
ma'am,
that is
before we close down, there is I have a question for you, ma'am.
Sure.
This is just informative, some information I seek from you. That is, you've spoken about when you sort of provided us with a sort of a history of the colonial times.
Right.
You provided us with this information that in the ancient times, in ancient India, sex workers were taxpayers.
Yes.
But during the Muslim period, during the, you spoke about the Ashrafi culture, the Tawaif culture, and you referred to Veena Wuldenberg's works, with reference to the Lucknow Tawaif. Now, in that period, whether they were taxpayers, I mean, during the Muslim period.
No, they were not.
Okay.
They were not.
So thank you very much, madam, for your wonderful lecture, as well as the way you responded to the questions.
Thank you so much,
madam.
Yes, now.
Thank you for the questions. I'm very happy. So many important questions came up.
We are really happy to invite you.
Thank you.
So, Paramita, I think Paramita will give the vote of thanks.
I don't say that this is a vote of thanks, but my heartfelt thanks to Shatidi for agreeing to this, despite her busy schedule, and also Chandrika Di for you to agree to chair this session in such a short notice. Yeah. And also to all the participants and who has made this session a lively one, an interactive one. Thank you. This time I think we have participants, from outside India too. Not to talk about participants pan-Indian. Thank you, Shatadev, once again. In this lecture series, the first lectures were first day lecture was on human trafficking. So in the Northeast, the problem of human trafficking was taken up, and then your lecture came in. There is a link throughout our lecture series about this, and we had a lecture scheduled on 24th, which we had to postpone to March. That will be by a doctor who is in intervention for health intervention for these sex workers and minority people.
Oh, wonderful.
I invite all of you, those who are present here, to join in that lecture also, so that all this culminate into some sort of a unified stand and a knowledge of this area of analysis. Once again, thank you all. With this, I can take leave now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Once again.
Thank you all.